The New Year Honours 1984 appointments by most of the Commonwealth realms of Queen Elizabeth II to various orders and honours to reward and highlight good works by citizens of those countries, and honorary ones to citizens of other countries. They were announced on the 31st of December 1983 to celebrate the year past and mark the beginning of 1984. United Kingdom. Life peers the Right Honourable Arthur George Bottomley, OBE, Member of Parliament from 1945 to 1959, and from 1962 to 1983. Minister of Overseas Development 1966–67 and formerly holder of other ministerial posts. Sir Peter Gordon Henderson, K.C.B., lately Clerk of the Parliaments. The Honourable Robert Alistair McAlpine, Joint Honorary Treasurer of the Conservative and Unionist Party. The Right Honourable Frederick William Mulley, Member of Parliament for the Park Division of Sheffield 1950–83. Secretary of State for Defence 1976–79 and formerly holder of other ministerial posts. Privy Councillors Kenneth Wilfred Baker, MP, Minister of State, Department of Trade and Industry. Member of Parliament for Mole Valley, Kenneth Harry Clark, QC, MP, Minister of State, Department of Health and Social Security. Member of Parliament for Rushcliffe, Alexander Patrick Graysdale, the Earl of Gowrie, Minister for the Arts. Knights Bachelor John Badnick, Consultant Physician, Oxfordshire District Health Authority. Richard John Bailey, C.B.E., Chairman, Royal Dilton Tableware Limited. Morris Edward Bathurst, C.M.G., C.B.E., Q.C. for services to international and comparative law. Timothy Hugh Bevan, Chairman, Barclays Bank plc. Paul Anthony Bramley, Professor of Dental Surgery, University of Sheffield. James William Alexander Burnett, for services to journalism and broadcasting. Lawrence Byford, C.B.E.Q., P.M.H.M. Chief Inspector of Constabulary. John Robert Cater, lately Chairman, The Distillers Company plc. Oswald Davies, C.B.E.D., C.M., Chairman, AMEG plc. Reginald Edwin Eyre, MP. for Political and Public Service. Geoffrey Finsberg, M.B.E. MP. for Political and Public Service. Richard Brinsley Ford, C.B.E. for services to the arts. Anthony Stewart Garner, for political service. Arthur Abraham Gold, C.B.E. for services to sport. Patrick Hamill, Q.P.M. Chief Constable, Strathclyde Police. Paul Joseph Morrow Kennedy, Judge. Wynne Normington Hugh Jones, M.V.O. for political and public service. Peter Stewart Lane, for political service in the south of England. Christopher Donald Lawson, for political service. Spencer Le Marchant, for political and public service. Edwin Ronald Nixon, C.B.E. Chairman and Chief Executive, IBM United Kingdom Limited. Dmitry Oblensky, Professor of Russian and Balkan History, University of Oxford. Kenneth Johnston Sharp, T.D., lately Head of Government Accountancy Service, Department of Trade and Industry. Philip Shelburne, Chairman, Brit Oil plc. William James Simpson, lately Chairman, Health and Safety Commission. Thomas Richard Edmund Southwood, Lineker Professor of Zoology, University of Oxford. John Sparrow, lately Director General, Central Policy Review Staff. Michael Ian Bosted Straker, C.B.E. for Public Services in the North East. John Henry Allen Swinson, O.B.E. for Public Services in Northern Ireland. Peter Anthony Thompson, Chairman and Chief Executive, National Freight Consortium plc. John Robert Vane, for services to pharmaceutical research. Gerard Folliott Vaughan, MP. for Political and Public Service. Alan John Ralph Veal, Managing Director, GEC Power Engineering Limited, for Services to Export. Peter Ingram Walters, Chairman, The British Petroleum Company plc. David Mackenzie Wilson, Director, British Museum, State of Queensland Drive. Llewellyn Roy Edwards, M.L.A. for Services to Government and Parliament, State of Tasmania. Geoffrey James Foote, for Services to the Community. Order of the Bath, Knights Grand Cross Military Division. General Sir George Cooper, K.C.B.M.C.A. D.C. Gen. Colonel Commandant Corps of Royal Engineers. Colonel the Queen's Gurkha Engineers. Colonel Commandant Royal Pioneer Corps. Civil Divisions of Brian Crossland Cubbon, K.C.B. Permanent Under Secretary of State, Home Office. Knights Commander Military Division. Vice Admiral Edward Rosebery Anson, Vice Admiral David Worthington Brown, Lieutenant General Charles Richard Huxtable, C.B.C.B.E. Colonel Commandant the King's Division. Colonel the Duke of Wellington's Regiment, Lieutenant General Joseph David Frederick Mostyn, C.B.E. Colonel Commandant the Light Division. Colonel Commandant Army Legal Corps, Lieutenant General Richard Frederick Vincent D.S.O. Colonel Commandant Royal Regiment of Artillery. Colonel Commandant Corps of Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. Honorary Colonel 100th Field Regiment Royal Artillery Territorial Army. Acting Air Marshal Donald Percy Hall, C.B.C.B.E.A. F.C. Royal Air Force. Civil Division. Gordon Stanley Downey, C.B. Controller and Auditor General. Peter Edward Middleton, Permanent Secretary, H.M. Treasury. Companions Military Division. Rear Admiral John Philip Edwards, M.V. Rear Admiral John Scott Grove, O.B.E. Rear Admiral David Edward Macy. The Venerable Archdeacon Raymond Harcourt Roberts, Q.H.C. Major General Joseph Porter Crowdy, Q.H.P. Late Royal Army Medical Corps. Major General Jonathan Hugh Bailey Dent, O.B.E. Late 1st the Queen's Dragoon Guards. Major General John Patrick Groom, C.B.E. Colonel Commandant Corps of Royal Engineers. Major General Richard Martin Jerram, M.B.E. Colonel Commandant Royal Tank Regiment. Major General Barry Michael Lane, O.B.E. Colonel the Light Infantry. Major General Martin Henry Sinnott, Late Royal Tank Regiment. Air Vice Marshal Robert Leslie Davis, Royal Air Force. Air Vice Marshal Lawrence Alfred Jones, A.F.C. Royal Air Force. Air Vice Marshal Richard Charles Fairfax Peace, Royal Air Force. Air Commodore Irene Joyce Harris, RCQ, HNS, Princess Mary's Royal Air Force Nursing Service. Civil Division. Frank Graham Allen, Clerk of the Journals, House of Commons. John Francis Holroyd Barker, Principal Director, Ministry of Defence. Rex Allen Browning, Deputy Secretary, Overseas Development Administration. William Ermit, Head of Agricultural Science Service, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. Jack Gill, Secretary, Export Credits Guarantee Department. John Stuart Goldsmith, Director General, Defence Accounts, Ministry of Defence. Terence Michael Heiser, Deputy Secretary, Department of the Environment. Edmund Rawlings Heward, Chief Master of the Supreme Court. Geoffrey Gordon Hume, Deputy Secretary, Department of Health and Social Security. Ivor Harry Lightman, Deputy Secretary, Welsh Office. John Howard Locke, Director, Health and Safety Executive. William Derrick Collier Liddon, Chief Planning Officer, Scottish Development Department. Ivor Thomas Manley, Deputy Secretary, Department of Energy. David Brian Rogers, Deputy Secretary, Board of Inland Revenue. Peter William Rumble, Under Secretary, Department of the Environment. Richard Maybury Hasty-Smith, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Defence. Stanley Anthony Treleaven Warren, Deputy Secretary, Ministry of Defence. Robert James Ware, Chief Medical Officer, Department of Health and Social Services, Northern Ireland. State of Queensland Drive. Douglas George Wilson, Government Medical Officer. Order of St. Michael and St. George Knights Grand Cross Sir Hugh Cortazzi, K. CMG, HM Ambassador, Tokyo. Sir James Craig, K. CMG, HM Ambassador, Jeddah. Knights Commander Richard Mark Evans, C. MG, HM Ambassador Designate, Peking. Charles Sidney Rycroft Gifford, C. MG, HM Ambassador Designate, Tokyo. John Edward Jackson, C. MG, HM Ambassador, Brussels. Philip Robert Akard Mansfield, C. MG, HM Ambassador, The Hague. Companions David Allen Nichols, Assistant Secretary, Ministry of Defence. Hugh James Arbuthnot, lately Consul at HM Embassy, Paris. Nicholas Peter Bain, HM Ambassador, Kinshasa. Anthony David Brighty, Consul at HM Embassy, Lisbon. Kevin Francis Xavier Burns, British High Commissioner, Accra. Richard Dennis Cleft, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Eileen, Mrs. Denzer, lately Legal Counsellor, Office of the United Kingdom Permanent Representative to the EC Brussels. Reginald Eric Holloway, H.M., Consul General, Toronto. Keith Gordon McInnes, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Richard Oliver Miles, H.M., Ambassador Designate, Tripoli. Alan Gordon Munro, H.M. Ambassador Designate, Algiers. Michael Edmund Pike, HM Ambassador, Hanoi. Gerald Chierichi Warner, Foreign and Commonwealth Office. State of Queensland Keith Williams, for service to the community. Royal Victorian Order, Dame Commander Lady Susan Catherine Hussey, C.V.O. Commanders Major Derek Swithenall Hewson. Miss Muriel Murray Brown, M.V.O. Michael William Leonard. John Philip Brooke Little, M.V.O. Alexander Morrison, Q.P.M. Member, 4th Class Miss Jane Edgerton Warburton. John French, T.D. Leonard John Gost. Joshua Alexander Losco, B.E. Commander Alec Christopher Moore, Royal Navy. John Inglis Trevor Pottinger, Graham Tullis Ross. Commander Simon Nicholas Guy Sloot, Royal Navy. Member, 5th Class Cheryl Diana, Mrs. Orton, Miss Jane Bartlett. Inspector Stephen Orm Burgess, Metropolitan Police. Miss Fiona Margaret Fletcher. Richard Saxon French, R.V.M. Squadron Leader Christopher Max Jerrig, Royal Air Force. David Bertram Fengorange. Peter Dawson Hartley. Superintendent Brian Peter Jeffrey, Metropolitan Police. Squadron Leader Hugh Northey, Royal Air Force. Royal Victorian Medal Police Constable Stanley Reed Buchan, Metropolitan Police. Police Constable Andrew Craig, Metropolitan Police. Cyril John Crow, William Fenwick. Miss Anne Gardner, George White Gordon. Philip Greenaway. Police Constable Anthony William Haynes, Metropolitan Police. Police Constable Andrew Mary Lees, Metropolitan Police. Violet Agnes, Mrs. Manel, K4288209. Chief Technician John Wakeham, Royal Air Force. Chief Petty Officer Stuart Terence Jack Warner, DO60267U. New Zealand. Knight Bachelor Charles Erskine Beaumark USO. For services to local government and the community, the Honourable Mr. Justice John Barry O'Regan, Judge of the High Court. Louise Nathan Ross CMG, Chairman, Bank of New Zealand. John Samuel Thorne OBEJP. For services to local government and the community, Order of St. Michael and St. George, Knight Grand Cross of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, the Right Honourable Robert David Muldoon CHMP, Prime Minister. Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George Norman Basil Phippard MBE JP, for public and community service. Judge Arnold Ray Turner, for services to local government and the community. Order of the British Empire, Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division William Douglas Lucas MBE, President, New Zealand Returned Services Association. The Honourable Robert Richmond Rex CMGOBE, Premier of Niue. Commander of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division Whitford James Brown OBE, for services to the city of Porirua. Mrs. Valmy Claire Foster, for services to the Save the Children Fund. John Henderson Ingram, for services to manufacturing and engineering profession. Richard Harlow Kerr, for services to the New Zealand Hospital Boards Association and the community. Mrs. Emmy Talbot, for services to the Women's Division, Federated Farmers of New Zealand. Gerald Pilkington Ward, for services to the fruit-growing industry. Military Division Commodore Douglas Bryan Domit ADC, Royal New Zealand Navy. Officer of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division Gary Clifford Brain, for services to music. George Te Oettinger Hoary Brennan, for services to the Maori people. James William Brodie, for services to oceanography. Caroline Brannan Cartwright JP, for services to the community. Claude Jeffrey Roden Chavis, for services to forestry, conservation and the community. Professor Robin Hamley Clark, lately Professor of Geology, Victoria University of Wellington. Harold Morley Denton, for services to education and tourism. Jack Dennis Laird, for services to pottery. Keith Duncan McCartney, for services to the dairy industry and the community. Geraldine Crichton McDougall JP, for services to the New Zealand Red Cross Society and the community. Harold Thomas Mann, for services to rowing. Dr. Ronald Bruce Miller, lately Chief Director, Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. Mrs. Lois Joan Muir, for services to netball. Maui Ormond Woodbine Pomeri JP, for services to the Maori people and the community. Ross William Southcombe, for services to export. Stanley Lake Young, Chief Traffic Superintendent, Ministry of Transport. Stephen Alexander Rusbach, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, New Zealand Police. Military Division Commander Robert John Eckford, Royal New Zealand Navy. Colonel William Charles Nathan Ed, Colonel's List, New Zealand Army. Group Captain Mervyn William Hodge AFC, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Member of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division Harry Botham JP, for services to music. Osmond Elgar Clayton, for services to brass bands. Morant Thomas Cooper JP, for services to local government and community affairs. Arthur Blair Cowan JP, for services to conservation. Owen Maxwell Curtis, for services to search and rescue operations and the community. William John Funnell, for services to search and rescue operations. Richard William James Harrington, for services to local government and community affairs. Mrs. Hainui Teipo Haumaha, for services to the Maori people. Mrs. Rose Hilary Adams Haylock, for services to the Girl Guide movement and the community. Eric Charles Hiscock, for services to ocean sailing. Mrs. Susan Oakes Hiscock, for services to ocean sailing. Alfred Reginald Bellingham Kingsford JP, for services to the community. Lawrence Frederick Luxton, for services to the New Zealand Navy League and the community. Eric Arthur Morgan, lately Assistant Director, Government Communications Security Bureau, Ministry of Defence. Charles Allen Morse JP, for services to the community. Mrs. Constance Olivet Nicholson, for services to music. William McNichol, for services to the kiwi fruit industry. Mrs. Lynette K. Parker, for services to netball. The Reverend Father John Newport Pound, for services to the community. Mrs. Janet Roberts, for services to the Women's Division, Federated Farmers of New Zealand. Dr. Robert Duncan Scott, lately Senior Casualty Officer, Accident and Emergency Department, North Canterbury Hospital Board. Peter Gray Scola, for services to the engineering profession. Glyn Lawrence Ducker, for services to thoroughbred racing. Robert Edward Walton JP, for welfare and community service. Military Division Warrant Officer Yeoman of Signals Bernard Hill, Royal New Zealand Navy. Warrant Officer Class 1 Terence Neil Archer, Royal New Zealand Engineers. Temporary Warrant Officer Class 1 Kevin Harry Winnie, New Zealand Special Air Service. Major Edwin Grant Steele DFC, Royal New Zealand Infantry Regiment. Major Brian Arthur Stewart, Royal New Zealand Engineers. Squadron Leader Peter James Garnett, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Queen's Service Order. Companions of the Queen's Service Order for Community Service: Mrs. Eileen Winifred Ha, Bernard Hollard, Ian William Jenkin, Murray Alistair McRae, Mrs. Molly Campbell Natush. Companions of the Queen's Service Order for Public Services: Catherine Edna Armstrong, Desmond Walter Rutherford Bell, James Thomas Brockless, Edward Meldrum Elliott JP. Dr. Raymond Robert Forster, Director of the Otago Museum. John Young Pethig JP. Graham Douglas Pringle, lately General Manager, State Insurance Office. Dr. Anthony Walter Reeve, Luhana Ratanga Air JP. Dr. William James Watt. Queen's Service Medal. Queen's Service Medal for Community Service: John William Ackroyd Kelly JP. Brian John Bennett, Keith Raymond Cairns, Kenneth George Danielle, Lindsay John Fay, Colin Purcell Finity, Eric John Hancock, Raymond Kenneth Himes, Charles William Ireland, Errol Graham Mason, Mrs. Katarina Maxwell, Mrs. Lillian Edith Mills JP. John Collinson Nesfield, Mrs. Marie Karaka Teiramatekno Narimu, Miss Norma Stewart Nisbet, Manaseli Palmer Tartau, Peter Graham Stokes, Mrs. Dulcie Doreen Sutherland JP. George Hamilton Ward. Queen's Service Medal for Public Services: Mrs. Margaret Mate Kitafiti Carr JP. Dr. Leslie Charles Carter, Brian Fabish JP. Miss Mary Jean Grant, Miss Isla Nolene Greenstreet, Public Health Nurse, Warkworth. Miss Margarita Ray Hoffey, Bob Johnston, Miss Maureen King JP. George Angus McGregor. Desmond James Stancliffe Ogle, lately Officer in Charge, Aupo Uri Forest, New Zealand Forest Service. Monaro Araretti, lately District Community Officer, Department of Maori Affairs, Hamilton. Mrs. Rhea Triance Schroff, Miss Edwina Anita Thompson, Hewitt Ross Dyson, lately Sergeant, New Zealand Police. Queen's Fire Service Medal: Peter Georgide, Deputy Chief Fire Officer, Invercargill Fire Brigade. Derek John Pitcairnley, District Officer, New Brighton Volunteer Fire Brigade. Ronald Albert Taylor, Station Officer, Upper Hutt Fire Brigade. British Empire Medal: Military Division Chief Petty Officer Administration, Alan Francis Oding, Royal New Zealand Naval Volunteer Reserve. Chief Petty Officer Radio Electrical Mechanician William John McAlpine, Royal New Zealand Navy. Chief Petty Officer Physical Training Instructor Gary Pettis, Royal New Zealand Navy. Staff Sergeant Michael William Pennington, Royal New Zealand Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. Staff Sergeant Victor Kawana Timu, New Zealand Special Air Service. Flight Sergeant Edmund John Russell, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Queen's Police Medal Alan Charles William Lambert, Superintendent, New Zealand Police. Colin Gordon Whitefield, Constable, New Zealand Police. Air Force Cross Flight Lieutenant Richard James Newlands, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Royal Red Cross. Associate of the Royal Red Cross Major Daphne Margaret Shaw, Royal New Zealand Nursing Corps. Queen's Commendation for Valuable Service in the Air Lieutenant John Nell Grant, Royal New Zealand Navy. Flight Lieutenant Colin Frank Pearce, Royal New Zealand Air Force. Cook Islands. Order of the British Empire. Officer of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division Mrs. Marguerite Nora Egg Urakitamira Story, for public and community service in the Cook Islands. Member of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division the Honourable Tangaroa MP, for services to the people of the Cook Islands. Papua New Guinea. Order of the British Empire. Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire Civil Division the Honourable Barry Blythe Holloway, C.B.E. MP, for services to politics and government.